So the next thing I'm going to do is going to introduce another column called fiscal year. All right. Here we already have a column called year, but that's a calendar year. That's the year where this date belongs to. Okay. Fiscal year is a different concept. Okay. So first notice this date column is basically the last day of a firm's fiscal year. So for Apple, its fiscal year ends in September 30th of each year. Okay. For the majority of the firms, I think their fiscal year coincides with their calendar year, meaning that the fiscal year will always end in December 31st. That coincides with the kind of the natural calendar year. Okay. However, for some other firms, the fiscal year can end, say, in February, in March, in January, or like Apple, they end in September. Okay. So because the fiscal year can, well, literally ends in any month. Okay, so here introduce a problem. So think about the company. If this company's fiscal year ends in, say, March 31st, okay, the end of March, okay. So basically, for example, if we look at this fiscal year that ends in March 31st, 2023, okay. So basically, this fiscal year starts in April 1st, 2022. Then covers the 12-month period and ends in March 31st, 2023. Should we consider this fiscal year as being year 2022 or being year 2023? Apparently, the majority of this fiscal year was actually in 2022. Okay, only 3 months is inside year 2023. Okay, so there's a convention, I guess, in accounting. So to define whether a fiscal year should be equal to the current calendar year or should be equal to the current calendar year minus 1. Okay, so the convention goes like this. If the fiscal year ends anywhere between January and June of the calendar year, then the fiscal year should be equal to the calendar year minus 1. Okay, so for example, if the fiscal year ends in March 31st of 2023, which is kind of, the first half of the calendar year, then the fiscal year should be equal to 2022, which is the current calendar year minus 1. Okay. However, if a fiscal year ends in the second half of a calendar year, okay, anywhere between July and December, then the fiscal year should be equal to the current calendar year. So, for example, if this firm like Apple, the fiscal year ends in September of 2023, which is the second half of year 2023, okay, then the fiscal year should be just equal to 2023. So that's what we call a conditional definition. So fiscal year is basically a conditional definition, depending on the last day of the fiscal year, whether that last day is in the months between January and June or the months between July and December. Okay, so we're going to construct a conditional column, and we call it fiscal year. All right, so to do that, we're going to go to this add column, and here's a button called conditional column. So there's going to be a dialog box here. All right, so the new column name, I'm going to call it fiscal year. Okay, and this if condition is going to specify the condition on which the fiscal year is going to be determined. Okay, so column name, you can choose the column name here. So we have dates, item number. So all those columns inside this data set is going to be listed here. I'm going to base the fiscal year on the month. Okay, so if month is equals, so here is going to be the operators you can choose from. You can choose equals, does not equal, is greater than, is less than, things like that. Okay, so I'm going to choose is greater than. So for the value, well, here again you have some choices. You can choose to enter a value, or you can choose select a column. Okay, so select any column inside this data set basically. Here I'm going to enter a value. Okay, I'm going to enter a value 6. So basically my condition here is if month is greater than 6, right? Then basically the fiscal year is going to end somewhere between July and December. So in this case, the fiscal year should be just equal to the calendar year. So then the output should be a column, and this column is going to be the year column. All right. So basically, this condition says if the month in which the fiscal year ends is greater than 6, okay, basically anywhere between July and December, then I'm going to take this output as the value for the fiscal year. And this output is the year column. So basically, the fiscal year is going to be equal to the calendar year. Otherwise, okay, otherwise it's going to be specified here under this else clause. Okay, otherwise I'm going to make the fiscal year equal to calendar year minus 1, right? Because else basically means if month is less than or equal to 6, right? Because here I already specified this condition as months being greater than 6. So otherwise meaning the month is going to be less than or equal to 6, which is the first half of a calendar year. All right. In that case, the fiscal year is going to take another different value, which is the calendar year minus 1, right? So to specify else, I'm going to tell Power BI, I'm going to take this value, year, the year column, which is why I use a pair of brackets to indicate I'm referencing the year column, and I'm going to subtract 1 from this year column. All right. Well, if you choose this select column, then you are only allowed to choose this year, and you cannot add this subtraction operation. Okay, so that's the reason I actually choose this enter a value, and I use this again, the DAX language, to tell Power BI I want to just take this column, but I want to subtract 1 from the value in that column. All right. So that will finish this definition of this fiscal year column, and I'm going to click OK. And here you see the fiscal year is going to be defined, and because for Apple, the fiscal year ends in September, so not surprisingly, the fiscal year is just the same as the calendar year, okay? But the reason I'm defining this fiscal year as a conditional column is I can use this definition for other companies. There might be other companies whose fiscal year ends in the first half of a calendar year. Then, because this column is defined based on certain conditions, so I don't need to really worry about whether the fiscal year ends in the first half or the second half of the year. This column is always going to give me the right answer. Okay, so that's kind of the cool part of defining a conditional column. And lastly, I'm going to again make this a whole number. All right.